millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me today. Last week I presented at the Help Group Summit, which was held at the Skirball Cultural Center in Los Angeles, California. And that summit brings together clinicians, therapists, educators, researchers, and parents to explore the latest advancements in understanding and supporting neurodivergence from childhood to adulthood. And I presented on executive functioning interventions. And many people asked if they could get a recording of the talk and found the information very helpful. So I thought that I would share the key points that I discussed in that talk for today's podcast episode. I began that talk by asking the audience to imagine trying to juggle 3 flaming torches while walking a tightrope. Now imagine doing this without a safety net. For many neurodivergent learners, this is what managing daily life feels like without strong executive functioning skills. And it also speaks to the idea that executive functioning is so important. I'm going to talk about that today. And I'm going to talk about why it is so important to provide support to further develop those executive functioning skills. So let me start by just reviewing what executive functioning is. I know that many of you listeners are very familiar with the term. You know what it is, so bear with me. But executive functioning refers to the ability to apply problem-solving skills to the achievement of goals. So ultimately, individuals are trying to achieve goals, and they do that through a number of different processes. And when you think about executive functioning skills, you're probably thinking about organization and planning and time management and beginning tasks, so task initiation. But researchers say that there's really 3 core executive functions, and all the rest branch out from those 3. And so when we think about those 3, one is inhibitory control, which is the ability to kind of inhibit your thoughts and actions and in a way that is appropriate for the situation. This means resisting impulses and stopping one's behavior at the appropriate time. And that is one of the key executive functions. Another one is working memory, which is the ability to hold information in your mind, manipulate it in a way to complete a task, or to use that information to generate goals. So when you think about working memory, I often think about kids who are doing math word problems. And you have an individual who's told Johnny has 3 apples, his mother gives him 4 more, and then he drops 1. How many does he have left? So Johnny has to hold all of that information in his working memory, perform the operations, the mathematical operations, and then give a response. And so that's an example of how working memory is used in academics. But we also use working memory to follow directions. And, I've often heard parents who say, I want you to go upstairs, put on your pajamas, brush your teeth, and get a book. And the child walks up the stairs, but might get distracted because of that poor inhibitory control. And they go upstairs later and find the child sitting on the floor playing with Lego. And so there are 2 things happening. One, they probably could not inhibit that urge to play with that shiny object, but also they may have had difficulty holding all of those items in their working memory. And so again, working memory is a primary executive function that impacts a number of different things beyond academics. And then the third primary area or core executive functioning skill is cognitive flexibility, which really refers to the ability to shift your attention, to shift your focus back and forth between tasks, and also adapt to new information. Change your way of thinking once you're given additional information that you didn't have before. And doing this and engaging in this shifting allows us to adapt to changing demands in our environment, and also improves our ability to manage new tasks and new information. And what many researchers say is that cognitive flexibility is really important for our ability to change perspectives and to see things from different points of view. And so you can see that all of these areas are critically important for all aspects of our life. We do this on a regular basis. The other executive functions that you are familiar with are task initiation, just getting started on tasks. Again, focusing, that attention control, the ability to pay attention, not just for a short period of time, but to stay focused over an extended period of time. Planning, organization, self-regulation. I did a complete episode on all of these executive functions. I'm going to put a link to it in the show note. And I also wrote up a summary of those executive functions, which I will also link to in the show notes. One of the things that we know is that all of those core executive functions allow us to engage in higher level thinking, right? In those higher level executive functions, which include things like prioritizing. When you have a number of things to do, how do you choose what to do first? How much time to spend on that one thing when you have a number of other things to do? That's where time management comes in, problem solving, reasoning, decision making, judgment, self-awareness. Those are all executive functions as well. And we know that executive functioning is closely associated with the frontal cortex of the brain, that prefrontal area that is the last part of the brain to develop. So the good news is that everyone will get better at those executive functioning skills as they get older. But for some, executive functioning develops more slowly. For example, ADHD is often described as a disorder of executive functioning. And about 90% of kids with ADHD have executive functioning challenges, and many of those challenges last into adulthood. And so we know that those individuals, again, have differences in the way that their brains are organized, which make executive functioning tasks more difficult. Autistic individuals also experience more executive functioning struggles than those who are not autistic, which means they have more difficulty with inhibition, with working memory, with cognitive flexibility, with emotional regulation. Individuals with dyslexia also sometimes demonstrate weaknesses in working memory for decoding and reading comprehension. So you can see that executive functioning can develop more slowly or differently in individuals who are neurodivergent. So why is it important to improve executive functioning skills? Well, executive functioning allows us to do all the things that we do on a daily basis and all the things that are not only important for childhood, but for adulthood. So if you think about executive functioning, what it allows us to do, it allows us to wait before speaking or acting, to resist our impulses, to stay focused despite being distracted. And of course, we live in a very distracting world. It allows us to see tasks through to completion, to finish things that we started, to hold alternative points of view in our mind while we are thinking about what to do next, while we are considering options, while we are making decisions. It allows us to look at situations from multiple perspectives. It allows us to change course when needed. It also allows us to seize opportunities when they arise. We know from the research that executive functioning skills start developing very early on. And some of those early executive functioning skills that are just developing as early as kindergarten actually predict academic achievement in second grade. There was research done that looked at working memory, cognitive flexibility, and inhibitory control, those three core executive functions. And they found that those kindergarten students who had stronger skills in those areas had higher academic scores in reading and math when they were in second grade. And that's critically important because we know that reading and math are important skills for those who are going to complete their educational career, but they are also predictors of educational success and societal opportunities as individuals age. And what is also important about that research, it shows that the executive functioning skills in kindergarten were actually better predictors of academic achievement than early reading and math skills. So we know that it's very important, those executive functioning skills, beyond what happens in middle school. And I say that because many students show up in my office and other offices in middle school because they're having trouble with those executive functioning skills. They're not turning in their assignments. It's taking a long time to complete their work. Parents say that they're not organized. They have difficulty with planning. They have trouble with writing. And I would say that we don't want to wait until middle school to intervene. And I'm going to share some information as to why that is. There was a study done in New Zealand. It's a Dunedin multidisciplinary health and developmental study, if anyone cares. I hope some of you do. But they actually looked at individuals. They looked at over 1,000 children, and they followed them until they were in their early 30s. And they looked at what were predictors of positive outcomes later in life. And they found that inhibitory control, again, that executive function, that core executive function, which really means that impulse control, the self-regulation, they found that those kids who had better impulse control, who had better emotional regulation in childhood, when they looked at them in their 30s, they had better health, they had higher incomes, better jobs, fewer run-ins with the law, and a better quality of life. They were happier. And that inhibitory control in early childhood was a better predictor of adult outcomes, better than and stronger than IQ, than gender, than social class, than family circumstances. And we know that those same inhibitory control factors actually predicted who was going to be early smokers in adolescence, who were going to drop out of school, and individuals who had poor impulse control in childhood were more likely to be teen parents in adolescence. So we see that those early markers of executive functioning can tell us a lot about what the risk factors are in adolescence and adulthood. And what I often say is that research really provides an opportunity to intervene. How do we take this information, use this information to improve outcomes for all individuals? So we can see that if we look at what the research tells us, we know that executive functioning is critically important for not only academic success, but for social, emotional, even occupational success as individuals get older. And so we want to think about ways that we can improve executive functioning skills to not only improve academic performance, but to increase the likelihood of a better quality of life for individuals. So Adele Diamond and Daphne Ling, who are researchers who've studied executive functioning extensively, what they did was they took a number of different studies, actually 179 studies, 193 research papers. They performed a meta-analysis, which means that they're going to look at all of these studies together, multiple executive functioning interventions that were studied by researchers from all over the world, and looked at individuals at all different ages. And what they wanted to see was what were the most effective executive functioning interventions that led to the best outcomes for individuals who are struggling with executive functioning. And they looked at a number of different things. They looked at which interventions resulted in more executive functioning improvement, which resulted in improvement compared to other interventions or a control group, individuals who did not have any intervention. And really what they wanted to do was look at those studies that had what they call an experimental design. So they had those individuals who got the executive functioning intervention or the support, and those who did not. Those would be the control group. And it's really interesting because when we think about executive functioning interventions, we may have in our mind what those interventions are and what might work. And this was really exciting and also very surprising findings with the research. And probably the biggest surprise is that a relatively understudied approach was found to be the most effective intervention across all of the metrics they looked at for judging the strength of executive functioning benefits. And so what does that mean? They found that the most effective executive functioning intervention was a mindfulness practice that involved movement. And what is an example of that? a lot of the Chinese mind-body practices. They found that Taekwondo, Tai Chi, they yielded the strongest results for improving executive functions. That was number one. The second most effective were school programs that integrated executive functioning, skill building, scaffolding, training, practicing, strengthening those inhibitory control processes, and integrating that through the school day over an entire school year was the second most effective intervention for improving executive functioning skills. And some people might ask, what were some of those school programs? They had the Chicago School Readiness Program, Mind Up, Paths, Tools of the Mind. Those are just some of the programs that were used. The Chicago program was an add-on for Head Start preschool classrooms. So they actually integrated it into those preschool classrooms. The Tools of the Mind program was integrated into preschool and kindergarten curriculum and was integrated into a majority of the day. And so all of their activities engaged children in pretend play and multi-step instructions and encouraged them to hold multiple roles and scenarios in their mind while they completed these tasks. And that was the second most effective intervention for executive functioning, school programs. So in integrating executive functioning skill building into the school. The third most effective was non-computerized cognitive training. And they found that if you have individuals who have executive functioning struggles and you actually teach them to hold and manipulate information in their minds over short periods of time while also engaging in other tasks, that was helpful, was very helpful in improving those executive functioning skills. Now, what's really interesting about these non-computerized cognitive training approaches is that it involved a higher level of in-person interaction. The researchers actually felt that the better outcomes with non-computerized training compared to computerized training was because of the interpersonal reaction between the trainer and the trainee. So the student was going through these non-computerized training with another individual by their side. And we know from the research that connection and having that social relationship improves outcomes. And so it's likely that that also played a role in the better outcomes with the non-computerized training. And that's not to say that computerized training programs are not effective. They actually came in number 4. And one specifically, the CogMed program, was very effective and was more effective than any other computerized cognitive training approaches. And what's interesting about the CogMed program, it found that the benefits lasted from 3 to 6 months in many individuals and even up to a year. But there's still, the research is still out on whether or not the CogMed improves working memory in school situations and other arenas of life other than just on the measures that were being tested. And so what we know and what this tells us is that executive functioning can be improved by a number of different approaches. And I do want to emphasize that just because the research shows that these are the 3 most effective executive functioning interventions, and again, the 3 most effective executive functioning interventions were found to be mindfulness practice involving movement like Tai Chi and Taekwondo, school programs, and non-computerized cognitive training programs, with the CogMed coming in at number 4. And so again, I want to say that just because these are the most effective does not mean that other strategies do not work. For example, many executive functioning coaching and educational therapy approaches are very effective, but they weren't included in the meta-analysis, largely because they didn't have a control group, which was a requirement for being included in the meta-analysis. Now, executive functioning experts that you might be familiar with, Peg Dawson and Richard Guare, have stated that executive functioning coaching has not been extensively researched in control studies, but research has shown that coaching can be an effective intervention with students from elementary school all the way to college age. And this approach can result in not only good academic outcomes, but social emotional outcomes as well. We know that programs like Think Smart, which target organization, time management, task initiation, planning by using concrete strategies to compensate for weaknesses and also has a parent support component, is very effective. And we also know that other research has shown that sports are more beneficial in improving executive functioning skills than aerobic exercise alone. And a lot of that might have to do with the fact that you have to use a lot of executive functions when engaging in sports. You need to sustain your attention. You need to hold the rules of the sport in your working memory while you are playing the sport. It requires disciplined action, self-regulation. You have to kind of inhibit those impulses and those emotional responses when you're losing or not doing well or you miss a shot. But it also brings joy, pride, and a lot of social bonding, which is found to enhance executive functioning skills. We know that cognitive behavioral therapy has been effective, particularly in reducing impulsive behavior in children, and a cognitive behavioral parent training approach is an evidence-based treatment for families and children, for families who have children with ADHD. Mindfulness without the movement component has also been established as a useful tool for strengthening self-regulation and attention, improving focus, and also decreases anxiety, and again, improves self-regulation skills. And we must not forget that environment plays a role. Positive parenting, having a warm approach to parenting, being sensitive to the needs of children, that is very impactful for impacting executive functioning skills. Having an organized home. Obviously, we want to establish limits at home, but having those family routines can be very important because they model good executive functioning skills. And we must not forget the importance of sleep. Sleep problems have been linked to executive functioning difficulties. And we know that those individuals who have poor sleep, have disturbances in sleep, have more difficulty with attention, with focus, with executive functioning, and also more difficulty with memory. So what does this information all mean? What is the takeaway from all of this information I shared? The big takeaway is that we know that executive functioning is essential to every aspect of life. Everything that we do as adults requires good executive functioning skills. And children are developing those executive functioning skills and are using those executive functioning skills on a daily basis as early as kindergarten. And we know that, again, those executive functioning skills that they are building have the ability to predict and do predict outcomes later in life beyond academic achievement. The good news is that we know that executive functioning skills can be improved with training, with practice, with addressing environmental factors that we know contribute to executive functioning struggles, and developing strategies to compensate for executive functioning weaknesses. And developing those strategies with an executive functioning coach or an educational therapist can be incredibly beneficial. I think another important and a very important takeaway is the effectiveness of integrating executive functioning training into school-based programs. What that tells me is that early executive functioning training is an excellent candidate for reducing inequality because it improves executive functioning in the most needy children. And what that can do is it can reduce gaps in achievement and health and provide improvements in executive functioning skills and all those associated skills for not only those individuals who are neurodivergent, but for all individuals. And so I think it's important to also recognize that when we're thinking about improving executive functioning skills, it's not going to be just one skill that we're improving. That should not be the goal, to just improve working memory or just to improve organization. We really have to think about enhancing all of those executive functioning skills because executive functioning is an umbrella term for a lot of different skills. And if we know the core skills are cognitive flexibility, inhibitory control, and working memory, then we can focus on those core skills and we can improve those core skills. And we have to think about doing that with a multimodal approach. In the same way we approach interventions for reading from a multimodal perspective, we need to think about improving executive functioning skills in the same way, where we have individuals work with an executive functioning coach, but we also integrate training programs into schools. We also have kids enrolled in Tai Chi and Taekwondo. We also make sure that we are prioritizing sleep and that we are equipping parents with the tools that they need to improve the executive functioning skills of their kids. So again, we know that executive functioning is important for every aspect of life, and those skills can absolutely be improved, and they can be improved with training, with practice, with a supportive environment, and developing strategies to compensate for those weaknesses. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned something today. If you did, shoot me an email, drkiwilson@childnexus.com. Let me know what you thought about this episode. Please be sure to check out the show notes. I have a lot of links to executive functioning resources in the show notes, so be sure to check them out and get on our email list. Be happy to connect with you, to provide you with additional resources to support the individuals in your lives who might be struggling with executive functioning or other aspects of learning or daily life. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.